Hey everybody, and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going to take a look at the changes that come with Vray 5 Update 2. Now, this one, even though it's not a major update, has some amazing features in it, and in this video, we're going to go and check out some of them. So, I'm going to start off with the most prominent thing you can find as soon as you install it, and that is the changes that are happening to the Cosmos browser. Namely, when you open it up, here you can find a lot of different subcategories, and for the first time you can see that they've actually added in a materials section. So once you click on it, here you have all sorts of different materials, and you can take any of these and use them inside your scene. So all you have to do is just check whichever material you need, and the good thing is if you click over here, they're actually separated in subgroups. So for example, if you need different metals or grounds or fabric, you just choose one and you have a plethora of different materials that you can use. Now, in case you want to use any of these, all you have to do is just go over here, click on the download. It will take just a bit of time. As soon as this thing is downloaded, now you can apply it to anything within your scene. For example, even if let's put in a teapot and go ahead and take this material, I can click, drag, and apply it to my teapot like this, and right away you can see how it looks. And I can also add in just a simple light in here, so when I go ahead and play with my lighting here, you can see how this material looks like. Now, another thing you can do is as soon as you go ahead and download any of these materials, what you can do is click on the import options, and in here you have the ability to turn on triplanar mapping, and you can turn on use real world scale. So for example, if I turn it off for the triplanar mapping, I need to apply this material again. You're going to notice that as soon as I do this, we no longer have the triplanar projection, so this material will be applied back on our model as it is. Now, a word of advice. I'm not sure if this is actually possible yet or not, but you're going to notice that once you go over any of these materials, down here you have a name which for this one particular says fabric wool black 01 15 centimeters. Now this means that this will be applied to that size. So this thing has been made for that size. And the interesting thing is, for example, that if I open up my material and I want to go in and sample this material, if I go over in my diffuse, I cannot change the tiling here. So if I go 5 by 5, you're going to notice that the tiling does not change. And the reason for this is that, well, this one is not a JPEG that you can change, but it's a TX file. So like I said, I'm not 100% sure if you can change this. If there is a way, please leave a comment down below the videos so we can share it around with anybody who might be watching this video. Now, the materials put aside, what we can do is we can go back here, and once you're at the home page, you're gonna get a explanation as to what's new. So you can see that we have over 200 materials, but we also have 100 plus new interior models, which is furniture, people, and more, and over 200 new exterior assets. And now all of these assets are very, very good quality. So if you can choose any of these, you can just, the same way we downloaded the material, once you go ahead and find something that you like, just click on the download. And as soon as this thing is downloaded, you can put it inside your scene, and you're going to see right away the quality of these assets. There we go. So just click on the green icon, and this thing will be imported into your scene. As you can see, it imports it not as a mesh, but more as a Vray proxy. And if you go over in our modify tab, you're going to see that this is a Vray proxy. And if you want to import this thing as a mesh, you just need to click on import as mesh. But like I said, take into account the fact that this will increase the number of polygons in your scene. So if you just want to use this thing for rendering, just leave it as a Vray proxy and you can render out anything else you want, or anything in your scene with this proxy. And you can use it in whatever scenario or rendering you have in your scene. Now, with all of this aside, I'm going to move on to my one of my favorite things that I just saw in this second update for Vray 5, and that is our material editor. Now, if you open it up, what you're going to notice is that more or less it's the same. There's just a small visual change once you go down to the maps. You have these lines which are just visually more appealing, but not really that much of a difference. But here's a good thing. There's actually a really huge change in the material editor. Namely, up until like this update, whenever you would scroll from one to another material, especially if it's any sort of a more complex material, Vray would have needed more time to propagate the changes so you can see the different parameters for the material that you're using. In this version, they've fixed that. So good job to Chaos for doing this, because now as soon as I add in, let's just simply go ahead and add in a couple of different materials. Let's keep it up. You're going to see that as soon as I click on this thing, this propagates right away. So even if I have very complex materials, in this case, I really don't have them, but we can take any sort of a different material. And you can see that right away, all the changes are done without any delay. And this is a lifesaver, especially if you're working on a scene that's quite heavy in materials as well as geometry. So once you start going from one material to the other, having to wait for that additional few seconds can be a lot of can bring in a lot of frustration. And with this update, that thing has been sorted out. All right, now, next one up on the changes list is the changes to the Vray frame buffer. Now, what I mean by this is if I open my Vray frame buffer, here you can see an image that I have rendered out, but here is the change that have been added. If I open up my side piece over here on the side, now you're going to notice that in here, there is another option that we can change on the fly here, and that is the sharpen and blur option. And by default, this thing has been turned off, but if you go ahead and click on calculate sharpen blur, this will automatically turn this thing on. And if I zoom in over here, for example, something like, let's see something that we can actually see with the that's something blurred up. So if I increase the sharpen amount, you're going to notice that this thing really sharpens up the entire image. And depending on whether or not you want to have something like this, you can choose to play around with these values, and you can either use the sharpen or you can use the blur, or you can just go ahead and play around with these until you get the result that you want. Now that's the sharpen and blur. And another, I would say it's a very good change, is what they did with the Vray log. Up until now, whenever you would start a render, the Vray log would just pop up on your window and show you all the different things that are happening in the background. So now what they've done is they've just went ahead and implemented the log over here. So it will always tell you all the information you want to see over here when you click on the log. So it's no longer going to be docked out. And me personally, I would generally, whenever I would start rendering, I would turn that thing off because, well, I never actually needed the log to tell me what's wrong with the scenes. Now, next thing that we're going to take a look, and generally this is my favorite addition on the 2. Or the 5.2 version of V-Ray, is the addition of decals. Now, once we go over to our creation set and go to V-Ray, you're going to find a new button over here that says Vray Decal. Now, what is Vray Decal? If you've ever used Unreal, you're gonna know that you can apply textures or any sort of a image with the help of a decal. And this is more or less the same way this thing works. So you just click and drag, you make a box, and then you give it a height. So basically, once you get this binding box in here, what happens is you can move it around, and this bounding box will basically project a material on it. So for example, if I go over and start this thing as a render, what you're going to notice is that without this box, or as I'm moving this box, there is going to be a particular change happening on our model. And that is because everything within this box has a planar projection on it. So if I go ahead and just apply a material to this planar projection and assign the material to selection, now I'm projecting this material on top of everything that's within this bounding box. Now, the good thing is that we can utilize different maps for this, being opacity, displacement, or bump maps. And the great thing about this is that at the moment, as we can see, this thing is being projected on the top here, on the side, and as well as on the floor of our scene. So if I go ahead and click on my projection or my Vray Decal and go into my modify tab, in here I have some options that I can choose. And the first thing I actually find most useful is the last option that I have, which is the exclude button. Now this thing is working in the same exact manner as Vray Lights do, in which means once you click on it, you can choose which items you want to include or exclude. So for example, for the plane, I want to exclude it. So illumination, click on over here and click OK. As soon as you do that, now this thing will no longer project on the bottom here. So it's only going to project on this material. Now the next thing is you can control the angle at which this thing is going to be projected. So if I put this thing on 20 degrees, what you're going to notice is that everything above those 20 degrees will not get any projection details. If I increase this to 45, you're going to notice that something did change. 35, there you go. So you can control how well this thing is projected based on the normal angle. And the more helpful way to doing this would be to simply just choose what you want to have this thing be projected on and exclude whatever is you don't want to have this thing projected to. So if I go in and increase this thing to over 160, you're going to see that now this thing basically wraps around the entire model. Now, how is this thing very helpful, to say the least? Well, if I move this thing upwards like this, all of a sudden now I have a very quick way of changing materials. And for rendering wise, this can be an interesting addition when you're doing your renders, if you want to add in some variety to it. So you don't have to unwrap this thing or do any sort of masks. You can just use it as it is. Now, there is another very good thing, and that is if I, for example, go ahead and just copy this thing, so Control V, and make a copy of it. And now on this copy, I'm going to add in a different material. Let's just make sure it's the second decal. Yep, it is. There we go. Now we have this second material applied to our item, but from what I can see now, my underlying material is more or less has disappeared. So what I can do here is again play with the order. Now if I go ahead and put this thing to 1, this will basically mean that this thing will have a number of order of 1. And to make it more visually simple, what I'm going to do is in my second material here, I'm going to use a opacity map. I'm just going to drag in one opacity map, put it in my, oh, all right, let's try a V-Ray bitmap. And here I'm just going to drag in a mask, which is just a regular black and white mask. I'm going to use something like this. Drag it in here. There we go. All right, so now what you can see is that as this thing is being projected with an order of 1, you can actually see this thing on top of the greenery material. If I put it to 0, but now the other problem is that this thing has the same order. So if this thing is 0 and this thing is 1, now you can see that this thing overlays the underlying material. So by using this approach, what you can do is you can basically stack different materials one on top of the other, and you can use this order just like you would use it in Photoshop to define which layer is going to be seen first. So the higher the order, the higher the level of the layer. Now, another piece of news that I actually did see on the changelog from Chaos Group is that now V-Ray can import basically USD scenes. So a USD scene is basically a universal scene description, and this is an open source 3D scene description and file format developed by Pixar for content creation and interchange among different tools. And basically this helps you take a scene packed up with all the information for materials and lighting, and basically swap it between different platforms. Now, for me personally, this wasn't a big deal because I haven't really used that much of the USD scenes. But you can always, if you want to test it out, you can go over to NVIDIA, and they have, I think, a couple of different scenes that you can download and test out to see how this scene is going to look over in your scene or in your renderer. Another small thing that actually has been added is there have been some changes to the Vray Lights as well. So if I go ahead and create a Vray plane light or pretty much any Vray light, what you're going to notice is once we go over to the Modify tab, in my options, you're going to see that we are now compacted down to just a few things that we can change. And there has been added in a new button that states or that we can change, which means affect atmospheric effects. Now, in order for this thing to be of actually any use, or how we can see how it works, we need to have a atmospheric effect added into our scene. So for this one, we can go. Just press 8 on your keyboard, so you go over to Environment and Effects, and into Atmosphere, we would have to add in a add and go to Vray Environment Fog. So now with this, we actually have fog into our scene. And if I want to see this thing, I need to add in a Vray Dome Light. There we go, like this. Now I'm going to pull on my rendering or the Vray frame buffer, and what you're going to notice is that even though I have this effect here, if I select just my light now and move it around. Just make this thing full screen so you can see it better. And if I go in and just rotate this thing like so, what you're going to notice is that this light now affects the fog in the environment. So if I go over in my modify tab, if I turn off the affect atmospheric effects, you will no longer see that glow lighting up the atmospheric effects. So this can be used to go ahead and fake God rays, and you can increase this effect or decrease it depending on how well you want to see this thing. So if I go to 0.5, we're gonna half that effect. If I go to 5, you're gonna really see that effect happening from the light. If I make it invisible, you can now only see the entirety of the fog being lit up without actually seeing the light plane. So that can be helpful if you're trying to achieve something down these lines. Now the last one of the changes that I want to go over is the changes to the Vray Displacement Mod. Now this is actually an interesting solution, because up until now, whenever you were using displacement, you had to choose one of the three ways that you can do it. And let me see how I can best explain this. So if we just create any sort of a model, in this case just a regular box, let's make it a 50 by 50 by 50. You can use anything you want actually. So I'm going to put it in the center. Now if I go ahead and I'm going to go over to my Cosmos browser, and pretty much I can take any image. Let's go with Magma Rock. No. All right, let's go with one of the ones that I already have downloaded. So maybe this rock tile is rough small. Click and drag it on top of this box. All right, so it looks just like this. And I'm gonna need a small light in my scene so I can actually render this. All right, let's open it up, the V-Ray frame buffer, and turn on the interactive rendering. All right, so it looks just as it does by when you take the material from the Cosmos browser. But now what we're going to do is we're going to go over in our Modify tab, and in here I'm going to use a V-Ray displacement map, or V-Ray displacement mod. Now as soon as I add this thing, here you have three parameters or three types. By default, I think it always stays on 3D mapping, but you have a 2D mapping and a subdivision. Now what the subdivision does, it basically treats this thing as a model that needs to be subdivided in order to get a more favorable outcome. In this case, it basically adds in extra edges, and all of a sudden our box just became a perfect sphere. Now the good thing about this is that with this update, now the V-Ray Displacement Mod will always check underneath it to see if there is anything that can show it where those sharp lines need to be. And luckily for us, we can just go in and use a crease modifier in here. And now for the crease, you can either select a particular set of different edges, or in this case I can just select all edges, and as I'm increasing the crease, you're gonna notice that this thing changes, and I can choose to go anywhere in the middle or pretty much any value that I might like. In this case, I actually like how this thing looks like, and you can use something like this as a ornament or filler in your renders, and you don't actually have to do anything. You can just use a box, which will in turn make your renders faster and your scene is going to be lighter because you don't actually have to put in all this geometry in here. You can just fake it with a crease, and the displacement mod will help you get this sort of a look. Now on this here, I can increase the amount and get a more pronounced look. But all in all, it's a nice addition for the Vray Displacement mod. So all in all, this round covers the more interesting aspects of the new Vray 5.2 version. And I have to say it one more time, a couple of these changes are very, very powerful changes. And I'm particularly happy about the addition of the Vray Decal, as I think this is a very, very powerful tool to have in our arsenal, and it can really speed up creation of different materials, as well as creation of different ornaments or pictures into our renders. So all in all, again, I hope you guys had fun and you managed to learn something from this video. If you would like to support me, you can always click the join button, and the direct links will be in the description below. And as always, the most helpful thing you can do is just click the like and subscribe buttons and just leave your comments below in the video. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.